What comes to mind when you think about home movies? Maybe the dusty cabinet of VHS tapes at your dad's house or your grandma's? Maybe you think of videos that you and your best friend took on your first iPod. Or maybe you think of something like this, a roll of film that contains memories of family vacations, birthdays, and snowball fights from the 70s. Here, I have some Super 8 film, probably a few minutes worth, bought at the Idea Store, which is a creative reuse store in Urbana, Illinois. The only label attached to this film is a slip of paper that was resting at the bottom of the can, which says Elizabeth, USA, 1981. As part of a project for a digital preservation course, I endeavored to digitize the film, or at least part of it, which we'll talk more about later. I wanted to see what was on the film. Was it even a home movie? Or did Elizabeth from 1981 have an amateur filmmaker career hidden away? Today we'll discuss my quest to discover what was on this film, and how we would even preserve something like this in the long term, whether as regular people who ended up with a box of home movies, or an archival institution with some more expertise and an expectation for long-term preservation and access. We'll talk about the history of home movies and Super 8 film, the complications of film preservation and archives, some digitization basics, and standards, technologies, and workflows that ensure long-term access to these films. Along the way, I'll share clips from this mystery film and from my dad's collection of home movies from his childhood. Get ready to be transported back in time, way back to the 60s. May 1st, 1965, was the day that Eastman Kodak publicly debuted Super 8 film at the International Photographic Exposition in New York City. Super 8 film was considered revolutionary, and the related technology of cartridge loading even more so for the home movie market. Gone were the days of jamming and interruption when loading film into cameras. The Super 8 film cartridges snapped into place and required very little fussing over camera settings. The film itself allowed for 50% more picture area than regular 8mm film. Best of all, Super 8 film and the related cameras and projectors were way more affordable and accessible than earlier systems. The cameras introduced by Kodak in 1965 started under $50, which is less than $500 today. Eventually, these prices dropped even more with competition, and a camera could be less than $30, with each film cartridge around $5, which in today's money is around $300 and $50 respectively. For Super 8 film, 8mm film was the standard. It was introduced by Kodak in 1932 and grew in popularity in the home movie market around the 50s. After the introduction of Super 8, film companies focused on improvements in the film. In 1973, a magnetic strip was added to Super 8 to record audio alongside the image. So, as revolutionary as Super 8 was back in the day, videotape ultimately won out in the home movie market after its introduction in the 70s and growing popularity in the 80s. U-matic tape was introduced in 1971, Betamax in 1975, and VHS in 1977. Super 8 lost popularity, though a market does still exist today in the film community. So why care about Super 8 film if it was essentially just a blip in the moving image story? Well, it's partially about recording the history of film, and partially about what was created with this cheaper, easier to use medium, home movies. Nowadays, there's a growing body advocating for the long-term preservation of home movies outside of amateur home-based preservation. This includes institutionally driven collection, digitization, and events like Home Movie Day. According to the Center for Home Movies, Home Movie Day is a celebration of amateur films and filmmaking held annually at many local venues worldwide, allowing individuals and families to see and share their own home movies in an open screening with an audience of their community. Most Home Movie Day events are free and open to the public and offer expert evaluation of films brought in by participants, along with tips for their care. Created in 2002, Home Movie Day is meant to share with the public the magic in watching films to the sound of a whirring projector in a dark room with other people. Archivists and conservators can share tips on preservation with community members who can access the tools to view and preserve their home movies, and along those lines, their cultural heritage. In the academic and artistic fields, there are other reasons why we might want to preserve our home movies. These reasons include anthropological and social research, data recovery and creative reuse, and access for future use cases. Access needs, then, might be the most important reason for prioritizing home movies for long-term preservation projects, such as digitization. So, several factors might influence digitization decisions. On a high level, these decisions are driven by an item's preservation concerns, uniqueness, cultural and historical value, and technical obsolescence, as suggested in the ARSC Guide to Audio Preservation. The resources available for digitization will also definitely influence these decisions. Although less relevant for home movies, copyright and ethical concerns might be factors in decision making. Think, for example, about what might happen if my home movies had a soundtrack containing music published in the 70s. My video would likely be taken down, or sections would be muted, as I would be in violation of copyright on the music. Digitization for preservation of films is safe under copyright law, but questions of provenance and ownership might affect accessibility, especially in our internet age. Before you ask, I did get permission from my dad to be sharing his films online. He said that I could use clips of him as a little baby being given a bath, but I won't subject the internet to that. So, as we previously noted, digitization of home movies can be extremely useful for preservation, access, and more recently scholarly research. Ultimately, the choice must be informed, weighing different priorities and available resources, which we'll discuss next. So, let's say you're looking to digitize your home movies. There are a few options. First is outsourcing to a reputable vendor who can take many different types of media and digitize them for you for a fee, returning to you your original film and an MP4 or other digital file for access. Many people choose to go this route, including cultural heritage institutions. They'll outsource their digitization for large collections, or if they don't have the resources to perform their work in-house. Some examples of vendors many institutions have turned to are Color Lab, George Blood Audio Video Film Data, and Memnon. This ultimately isn't a bad option, since you don't need to learn how to digitize the film yourself or find the obsolete hardware to do so. On the other hand, you may have less control over file formats and other specifications if you are outsourcing. Many vendors may not even know what qualifies as a preservation format, though this isn't always the case. Either way, you must still perform quality control activities upon return and, of course, ensure the long-term preservation of the physical film itself, even after digitization. We'll talk more about long-term preservation in a bit. So, what if you want to digitize your Super 8 film yourself? There are a few different levels to choose from here. If you're just looking to digitize a small amount of home movies, your public library or a local makerspace may have the tools to help you. The Memory Lab movement focuses on providing the tools and resources for DIY digitization and preservation free of charge at a number of public libraries. Another option is to purchase the hardware required to digitize film. This tends to apply more for archives and cultural heritage institutions. However, the editors of the Digital Readiness Toolkit note that motion picture film digitization equipment is prohibitively expensive for most small institutions, and even for well-funded institutions, it's worth considering if the amount of film to be digitized warrants purchasing equipment over working with a trusted vendor. So, if your institution does decide to set up a digitization suite for film, the minimum required hardware is a computer with high RAM and storage, a film scanner, and external digital storage. Recommended film scanners for high-quality digital preservation range from a few $1,000s to tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So, with all of this in mind and a grad student's budget, I opted to visit my local public library and see what they had available. My dad went the vendor route. His videos do look a lot better than mine, but admittedly he paid a lot more than I did. I used one of the least expensive film scanners out there, which was a couple $100s originally for the library, to essentially take digital photos of each individual frame on a tiny light table, manually pulling the film through the machine. As you can imagine, the quality wasn't the best, and there was a lot of shakiness due to poor alignment of each frame. That's my fault, and it was an incredibly time-consuming process just to capture about 30 seconds of film. So, and then once I had the photo files, I then had to use a separate software to import the photos, set the frame rate, and create a finished video file. It was cool to see my at-home digitization process worked, but I would much rather spend a bit more money to send the film to a trusted vendor for digitization in the future. In comparison, my dad's digitized film looks way better and is in an accessible file format for everyone in the family to use. Speaking of accessible file formats, let's talk about standards and workflows for Super 8 film digitization. There are a couple options for file formats and encodings. For preservation files, aka the long-term high-quality digital surrogate, the current standard options are 1. Uncompressed digital picture exchange files alongside broadcast wave format files with the linear pulse code modulation codec for audio. 2. FFV1 codec with lossless compression and LPCM audio in a Matroska container. Or 3. JPEG 2000 codec with lossless compression and LPCM audio in a material exchange format container. With all of these types of files, an access copy would be necessary. This could be an MPEG-4 format with H.264 video codec and AAC audio codec. The resolution could also be smaller, so for 80p, for example, compared to the HD resolution of the preservation copies. The clips shared in this video would be considered access copies. We cannot talk about digital files without talking about metadata. With audiovisual materials, there are additional metadata standards to consider, such as PB-Core. PB-Core is an extension of Dublin Core, functioning as a content standard for describing and cataloging audiovisual materials. Specifically for film, we want to be able to describe specific information such as format, runtime, physical length, condition, creators and contributors such as publishers, genre, rights, and subjects. AV materials in general require a more detailed level of description than other types of objects, such as books, due to their complex nature. Once we add in digital surrogates, metadata becomes even more important to provide access points for users, link instantiations of the film together, and provide vital provenance information and context to the user. Finally, we need to consider the overall workflow for describing and digitizing film. This would include creating inventories, performing condition assessments, processing, and providing access. For more information on assessments, I would consider checking out the AV assessment ratings used by the Archives of American Art. The system would help us decide whether we want or need to address digitization immediately, and what other steps we can take to ensure long-term preservation based on our available resources. Whether digitization is the ultimate goal or not, our Super 8 films need to be preserved long term. Here's a quick rundown of physical preservation guidelines for film. Ideally, film is stored between 0 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but acceptable storage is 33 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit with a relative humidity of 30 to 50%. If these numbers are not possible in the storage space, whether a home or an archives vault, lowering the temperature and relative humidity slightly will better suit the storage needs of the film without damaging any other archival materials or being too uncomfortable for living spaces. The adjustment will take some time, but provides a low-cost solution. Additionally, collecting institutions can purchase a small freezer for film, which would need to be double bagged and acclimated in stages for use. Archives vaults should be kept completely dark unless materials are being retrieved or shelved. Film should be stored in vented inert plastic cans with inert plastic cores, so not the same way that I have them stored here. If at an institution, film cans should be stacked horizontally on metal shelving in a vault that has been dedicated solely to film storage, ideally. Film should always be handled with gloves, preferably nitrile gloves, and only handled on the edges so as not to touch areas of the film containing sound or image that might be damaged. The digital preservation of files produced through digitization is also an important piece of the long-term preservation puzzle. This might involve practices such as including checksums in files, backing up our preservation copies in multiple locations, and maintaining separate preservation and access copies. So, we've talked about the history of Super 8 film, why we might want to preserve home movies, and factors influencing digitization decisions, some digitization basics and standards, and how to improve the long-term preservation of our Super 8 films. The final point that I want to leave you with is the impact that digitization and access to home movies has on our cultural heritage. As archivists, librarians, or just people with the resources to make digitization happen, we must think about how our biases impact our prioritization for digitization and access. We also want to think about how the content of these films might add to or shape cultural heritage. Take, for example, the home movie Topaz, which was filmed by a man of Japanese descent in an American concentration camp during World War II. The home movie depicts snippets of life in the camp and is now a part of the National Film Registry. The films that we choose to digitize, and especially the films that we choose to make accessible to a wider audience on the internet, have an impact. So while Elizabeth from 1981 might not have thought her home movie was worth keeping, my experience with the film has allowed me to see it in a different light, as part of the study of home movies and creating access to cultural heritage for the generations to come. Thanks for watching.